In the 1960s, one man's name had become a nightmare for law enforcement agencies across the United States. His name was James Earl Ray. He sat right at the top of the FBI's most wanted list. Nearly every law enforcement agency in the country was hunting him down. But what shocked authorities the most was that even after being captured, he managed to escape from prison twice. This wasn't just any prison. He was held inside a maximum security facility, a place where inmates were watched every second of the day. So the question is, how did James pull it off? What clever tricks did he use to break out from behind the bars? And what crime did he commit that placed him among America's most wanted criminals? This is today's story, the story of James Earl Ray. James' life had been tied to crime and theft since childhood. He was the eldest among 9 siblings. His father was a con man and a thief. The family's life was spent constantly on the run. They moved from one city to another, one state to the next. Whenever a theft or scam succeeded, they would immediately relocate to evade the police. This was the era of the 1930s and 1940s, nearly 90 years ago. James grew up in this chaos, with no real alternative path before him. He chose the same road his father had walked, the road of fraud and theft. Gradually, James himself stepped deeper into the world of crime. He carried out petty thefts, scammed people using fake schemes, and kept moving from place to place. He was first caught in 1949 in California and was convicted. The theft was minor, so he received a sentence of less than a year. But just 3 years after stepping into prison life, in 1952 he was arrested again. This time, he had attempted to rob a taxi driver in Illinois. The crime was classified as armed robbery and he was sentenced to 2 years in prison. During those 2 years, James tried multiple times to escape from prison but failed every single time. Eventually, he served his full sentence and walked out of prison. Perhaps someone might have expected that by now he would change. But for James, prison was nothing more than a temporary obstacle, not a lesson. Just months after his release, in 1955, he was arrested yet again. This time, he was caught in Missouri. He was accused of attempting to steal checks through the mail. In the United States, this is considered a federal offense, a serial federal crime. As a result, he was sentenced to 4 years in prison. During this time as well, James made multiple attempts to escape, but failed every time. He was forced to serve the entire sentence. Just a few months after his release in 1959, he was arrested once again. This was his 4th arrest. This time he had committed another armed robbery. But what's shocking is the amount he risked everything for, just $120. Adjusted to today's value, that's roughly around $1,000. The amount wasn't huge, but James' long criminal record and repeated offenses made the court far more severe. The judges believed that if he committed a new crime every time he was released, then he posed a serious threat to society. In this robbery attempt, someone could easily have been injured or even killed. Because of this, the court handed him a direct sentence of 20 years in prison. In 1959, James was sent to the Missouri State Penitentiary. It was considered the largest and most brutal prison in the state. It carried the status of maximum security prison, a place from which escape was considered nearly impossible. But James' mind was always consumed by one thought: escape. For years, he remained obsessed with figuring out how he could break out of prison. After spending nearly 8 years behind bars in 1967, he finally came up with a plan he believed would work. At that time, James worked in a prison bakery. This bakery didn't just supply bread for inmates, it produced large quantities that were shipped outside the prison as well. The bakery supplied bread outside the prison. Every day a truck would arrive, bread would be loaded into it, and then distributed across different parts of the city. James had worked in this bakery for years. During that time, he built strong relationships with the other inmates working there. He knew that if he ever wanted to escape, he would need their help. His plan was simple but bold. He would hide inside the large wooden bread crates and get transported out of prison. For months, he studied the plan from every possible angle. Once he was fully convinced it could work, he shared it with his closest inmate allies. Even though they had nothing to gain from his escape, their friendship and loyalty to James made them agree to help. On April 23, 1967, James put his plan into action, but first, they needed to distract the guards. At the exact moment, one inmate deliberately pretended to injure his leg while working. The guards rushed toward him, and in that brief window, James quietly slipped inside one of the crates. Bread was then stacked on top of the crate, completely concealed him. For hours, James lay motionless inside that cramped, sealed box. He had already drilled tiny air holes beforehand, otherwise he could have suffocated. Space was suffocatingly tight, air barely reached him, but James endured it all. Finally, the truck exited the prison gates, and with it, the crate carrying James was loaded out. As soon as the truck hit the road, James seized his chance. He forced his way out and quickly searched for a place to hide. Nearby, he found a junkyard, where he remained hidden the entire day until evening. Meanwhile, prison authorities realized his absence far too late. By the time the search began, James was already far away. Police and security agencies launched a large-scale search operation, but nothing turned up. Dense forest, remote terrain, and the delayed response, all of it worked in James' favor. Even helicopter aerial searches proved useless, because beneath the cover of trees he could easily stay hidden. James kept moving from one city to another. He first arrived in Chicago but didn't stay there long. Soon after, he decided to leave the United States altogether and fled to Canada. He spent some time in Toronto and later in Montreal. After months of hiding, he began to believe the police attention had faded, so he returned to the United States, this time landing in Alabama. But he didn't stay there long either. Before long, he left the US again, this time escaping to Mexico. In Mexico, he tried his hand at odd, unusual jobs. At one point, he even dreamed of becoming a director of adult films. He remained hidden there for some time, but in March 1968, he once again returned to the United States. This time, he chose to settle in Georgia. Within just 1 year of escaping prison, James had traveled across much of North America. He was still a wanted man, but intensity of search had slowed. Back then, surveillance cameras weren't everywhere. There were no mobile phones, no internet, nothing that could easily track someone's movements, which made fugitives like James extremely difficult to locate. During this time, James purchased a Remington rifle fitted with high-zoom scope. He told the shopkeeper it was for hunting, but his true intention was something far darker. After buying the weapon, he traveled to Memphis, Tennessee. There, he rented a room in a small house, located directly across the street from the hotel called the Lorraine Motel. On the evening of April 4th, 1968, James opened the bathroom window of his room. He raised his rifle and took aim at a man standing on the motel balcony. He fired a single shot. The man collapsed instantly. The man's James had shot was Martin Luther King Jr., one of the most influential leaders of the 20th century, the foremost face of the African American civil rights movement, a voice for social change across the United States. After the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., shockwaves spread across the entire nation. Police and the FBI immediately launched an investigation. In the very early stages of the probe, the name James Earl Ray surfaced, and he was declared the prime suspect in the assassination. Investigators recovered a map from James' room, on which circles had been drawn around Martin Luther King Jr.'s home and his church. From the same location, authorities also recovered a Remington rifle, the very weapon used in the killing. An additional scope was found nearby. Fingerprints belonging to James Earl Ray were present on all of it. The exact motive behind the assassination was never fully established, but the evidence made one thing clear: James was directly involved. The FBI placed him at the very top of America's most wanted list. A massive nationwide manhunt was launched. For James, this wasn't the first time police were chasing him, but this time the situation was entirely different. Every law enforcement agency in the country was watching for him. James realized that if he wanted to survive, he had to leave the United States immediately. He fled north, once again returning to Canada. There, using forged documents, he managed to obtain a fake Canadian passport. With the help of that passport, he boarded a flight to London. From London, he traveled onwards to Portugal. In Portugal, he attempted to reach Africa, hoping to become a hired soldier, a mercenary, but the plan failed. After some time, James returned to London and arrived at Heathrow Airport. His plan was to use the fake Canadian passport once again and board a flight to African country, but this time luck was not on his side. Airport security officials grew suspicious of his documents. A deeper inspection revealed his true identity. He was the fugitive the entire United States was searching for. On June 8, 1968, just 2 months after Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination, James Earl Ray was arrested at Heathrow Airport. Soon afterwards, he was extradited to the United States to stand trial in court. During the trial, in the beginning, James Earl Ray confessed to the assassination in court. Shortly afterward, he changed his statement. He claimed he had not actually committed the crime. According to him, he had confessed only out of fear of receiving the death penalty. He said his lawyer had advised him that if he pleaded not guilty and the case went to trial, the jury could sentence him to death. However, James later argued that his lawyer's information itself was incorrect, because by that time the death penalty had already been abolished in Tennessee. He claimed his confession had simply been an attempt to avoid execution. But when investigators presented hard evidence, his room, the rifle, and his fingerprints, James changed his story yet again. He alleged that a mysterious organization was behind the assassination and that he had merely acted as a pawn. James claimed he had been unknowingly working with this organization. He even named a man, Raoul, saying this person had instructed him to buy the rifle and was present in that room when the shot was fired. It is true that MLK Jr. had many enemies, as he was the strongest voice of the civil rights movement, but no evidence was ever found to support James' claims. No organization was proven to exist, and no trace of a man named Raoul was ever discovered. Ultimately, the court found James Earl Ray guilty. He was sentenced to 99 years in prison, effectively a life sentence behind bars. He was sent to Brushy Mountain State Penitentiary in Tennessee, one of the most secure prisons in the state. Brushy Mountain was nothing less than a fortress. It housed the most dangerous criminals, rapists, murderers, the serial killers. The environment was brutally harsh. Even the smallest mistake could cost an inmate his life. The entire prison was surrounded by walls nearly 5 meters high and 1 meter thick. They were built from massive stones, some weighing over a ton each. Barbed wire ran across the top, charged with deadly electric current capable of killing anyone instantly. And even if a prisoner somehow managed to overcome all those obstacles, an even greater danger awaited. 9 watchtowers surrounded the prison. Each tower was manned by armed guards. They carried shotguns, revolvers, and rifles, and had full authorization to shoot any inmate attempting to climb the walls. Seeing these layers of security, James realized something crucial. The best way out was not over the walls, it was beneath them. For months, he carefully studied his prison cell. That's when he noticed the biggest structural weakness: a small ventilation opening. The vent was sealed with a metal plate, bolted tightly into the concrete with screws. Removing the screws wasn't the hardest part. The real problem was the size of the opening. It was so small that maybe a child or a cat could pass through, but an adult man, it seemed impossible. But James had made up his mind. Using nothing but a spoon, he began slowly scraping away the concrete around the vent. The work was exhausting and painfully slow. Imagine breaking concrete with just a spoon. Night after night, he chipped away patiently, bit by bit, and before morning came, he would hide every trace of his work. From the prison yard, he collected dirt and mixed it with the toothpaste, creating a cement-like paste. He used this mixture to fill the scraped areas, making it appear as if the vent had never been touched. Then he would tightly refasten the metal plate back into place. During this time, James took another calculated step. He deliberately began losing weight. He knew the thinner he became, the easier it would be to squeeze through the tiny opening. After months of relentless effort, he finally widened the vent enough to crawl through. Behind the vent lay a maze of pipes connected to the prison's essential systems: sewage, electricity, heating, and the steam lines. These pipelines ran beneath the entire prison complex. At the end of the network was a large ventilation fan used to push air out of the prison cells. James had carefully studied the prison's layout. He realized that if he could somehow get past that massive ventilation fan, he would emerge directly into the main prison yard. The yard was the area where inmates were brought out during the day under heavy supervision. On ground level in the yard, there was a manhole cover. resembling a sewer entrance. For months, James had observed it closely. He estimated that the pipes beneath it likely led to the prison's power station. The power station supplied electricity and the steam to the entire prison. If he could reach those pipes, he might find a way beyond the prison walls. But reaching the yard during the day was impossible. Guards watched the area constantly. James had only one option: to move silently through the ventilation tunnels at night and emerge into the yard undetected. From there, he would enter the manhole and crawl into the pipe system. But another major obstacle stood in his way. In front of the ventilation fan, thick iron bars had been installed. Without removing them, escape was impossible. James had no saw, no tools, nothing that could cut through iron. He spent months thinking about how to solve this problem. Eventually, he realized he would need the help from outside the prison. He turned to his brother, Jerry. James was the eldest of the 9 siblings, and Jerry was the one closest to him. Jerry visited him in prison frequently. James wrote him a mysterious letter. He didn't directly mention bringing a saw. Instead, the brothers used a pre-decided secret code. They used a secret code so that even if the prison officials read the letter, they wouldn't understand its real meaning. James' brother, Jerry, executed the plan with extreme caution. He purchased a small hacksaw blade and hid it inside the sole of his shoe. First, he peeled off the bottom layer of his shoe, placed the blade inside, and then sealed it back so perfectly it looked untouched. When family visitation day arrived, Jerry came to the prison. As per prison rules, every visitor was thoroughly searched to prevent contraband from reaching inmates. But Jerry's concealment was flawless. Guards never discovered the blade hidden in his shoe. The meeting room was under surveillance. James and Jerry sat face to face, speaking as if nothing unusual was happening. In reality, they had planned everything in advance. Both brothers wore identical shoes, same color, same size, same brand. Prison rules allowed families to bring clothes and shoes for inmates, except uniforms. Jerry had brought James clothes and footwear before, so this raised no suspicion. During the visit, the 2 brothers quietly switched their shoes. The guard noticed nothing, and James successfully carried the blade back to his cell. That very night, James descended through the ventilation shaft and began cutting the iron bars. He knew the task would be slow, exhausting, and dangerous. Every night, he carefully cut a little more and then concealed all evidence before dawn. After 4 months of relentless effort, he finally cut through the bars and opened the pathway forward. But just as he breathed a sigh of relief, a new challenge stood before him. Beyond the bars was the ventilation fan itself, and this was no ordinary fan. Its blades were made of extreme strong metal. James had assumed he might bend them by hand or force his way past them, but reality was harsher. No matter how hard he pushed, pulled, or struck them, the blades didn't budge. The fan was built from heavy industrial-grade metal. James realized he would need yet another tool. He needed a tool powerful enough to bend or break the fan blades, and the most suitable option was a pipe wrench. But smuggling such a large tool into prison from outside was nearly impossible. That's when luck seemed to favor James. One of his closest friends in prison was Jake Murlock, who worked for prison as plumber. Jake's job involved repairing pipes and system lines, which gave him access to multiple tools, including pipe wrenches. The tools were kept under guard supervision, but Jake could borrow them overnight without raising suspicion. When James told Jake about his escape plan, he invited him to join. Jake agreed immediately, yet promised to arrange the wrench. But a new problem emerged. James and Jake were not housed in the same cell. Each inmate's cell assignment was recorded in a nearby office roster. The roster was written in pencil, so names could be changed when necessary. James recognized this as a security weakness. The office wasn't even locked because guards didn't consider it highly important. Inmates were sometimes allowed to near it. James recognized this as the security weakness. The office wasn't even locked because guards didn't consider it highly important. Inmates were sometimes allowed near it. James began studying the guards' routines, waiting for the right opportunity. Finally, he got his chance. On May 2nd, that day, regular guards were off duty, and inexperienced replacements were assigned. Their numbers were lower too. For James, it was perfect window. During recreation time, James quietly slipped into the office, erased a name from the roster, and wrote Jake's name in its place. That evening, when inmates were escorted back to their cells, the new guard relied on the altered roster. Jake was sent directly into James' cell. Now the 2 accomplices were finally in the same cell. They waited through the night and decided their move would begin at 2 a.m. because that was when the guards completely had their final round and the next head count wouldn't occur till 6 am. As soon as the guards completed their round and moved on, James and Jake could take their next step. They placed fake heads on their pillows, handmade replicas. From a distance, it looked as if both inmates were fast asleep. Even if a guard peeked inside, nothing seemed unusual. After that, the two men began crawling through the ventilation opening, the same one James had spent months widening. Because of Jake's larger body, the passage was extremely difficult for him, but somehow he managed to squeeze through. Slowly they advanced until they reached the massive ventilation fan. Using the pipe wrench, they began bending the metal blades. After immense effort, they managed to create a narrow gap. But there was a problem. The opening was barely enough for James, but far too small for Jake. James struggled and barely forced himself through. Jake tried repeatedly but couldn't get past the tight space. Eventually, with no other choice, he decided to turn back. Jake returned towards the cell, while James continued alone. James had now reached the prison yard. Carefully, silently, he moved towards the manhole he had studied for months. He was convinced that this was the path that would lead him beyond the prison walls to the power station. He scanned the area, making sure watchtower guards weren't looking. Then slowly he lifted the manhole cover. But the moment he looked inside, a violent blast of steam struck his face and body. Hot steam surged through the pipe below, part of the prison's heating system. The pipes were old, deteriorated, and poorly insulated. Dangerous heat was leaking outwards. James' skin began to burn instantly. He realized descending inside would be like jumping into a pit of fire. As he pulled his head back out from the manhole, watchtower guards spotted him. Alarms blared immediately. Within moments, James was captured. He was taken to a secure interrogation room inside the prison. As the investigation unfolded, his entire escape plan came to light. The tampered ventilation shaft, the hidden blade inside the cell, Jake's involvement, and even the role of his brother Jerry, all of it was exposed. Jerry had been waiting outside the prison walls at a pre-decided location, sitting inside a car. He had brought some money and even a gun for James to help him after the escape. He waited the entire night in the car, but when James never showed up, he realized the plan had failed. Later, he heard the news on the radio that his brother James Earl Ray had been caught while attempting to escape the prison. The complex escape plan James had built over nearly 2 years had completely collapsed. The failure was a devastating blow. As punishment, he was placed in solitary confinement for 2 months. That meant total isolation, locked inside a cramped cell. No conversation, no contact with other inmates, a punishment known to break prisoners mentally. But on James, it had the opposite effect. The moment he came out of solitary, his mind returned to planning escape once again. Because of a man sentenced to spend his entire life in prison, escape was the only path that existed. The difference now was that the conditions had become even harsher. Guards watched him constantly, but James refused to give up. For years, he kept searching for weakness inside the prison, testing every small possibility. 2 years passed, then 3, and by 1976, nearly 5 years after his failed escape attempt, James was working in the prison laundry. One day, during maintenance work, he noticed something unusual. Old metal pipes had been replaced, each about 1 meter long. They had been discarded carelessly on the ground, as if they were worthless. No one bothered to remove them. Quietly, James picked up the pipes and hid them in a corner of the laundry, behind piles of clothing. At the time, he didn't know exactly how he would use them, but something inside him said one day they would matter. Time kept passing. It was now 1977. 6 years had passed and James' last failed escape attempt. Every single day, he searched for weaknesses inside the prison. He examined every corner carefully, hoping to find even the smallest path to freedom. One day, while walking in the yard, his eyes fell on a section of the prison wall where it met the edge of the hillside. As mentioned before, the walls were lined with electrified barbed wire, but at this particular spot, James noticed a flaw. The wires were slightly raised above the wall, creating a narrow gap, just wide enough that a man might squeeze through without touching the electrical wires. James studied the location repeatedly. It offered a natural advantage. On the other side of the wall, the ground level was higher. A hillside slope rose upward. which meant if he managed to climb the wall, he wouldn't injure himself while jumping down. Now the only question was how to reach the top of the wall. That's when he remembered the metal pipes he had hidden earlier. An idea formed in his mind. By joining the pipes together, he could build a temporary ladder. Using the ladder, he could climb the wall, slip through the narrow gap, and move towards the freedom. The plan was bold, extremely risky, but James believed that this was his greatest chance yet. In the coming weeks, he began paying attention to every detail, because he knew even the smallest mistake in this attempt could cost him his life. The first major problem emerged quickly. The pipes he had weren't enough. The ladder they could form was not tall enough to reach the wall. The prison wall stood nearly 5 meters high, and he didn't have that many pipes. That's when James sought help from another inmate, Jack Shelton. Jack was no ordinary prisoner. He had attempted escape from multiple prisons before and considered himself an experienced escape artist. When James explained his plan, Jack agreed immediately. He found the idea smart and achievable. James had chosen Jack for a specific reason. Jack worked in the prison workshop. The workshop handled plumbing and metalwork, where pipes were used regularly. From there, Jack slowly began sneaking pipes out. It's important to note, guards kept strict watch over tools, hammers, screwdrivers, pliers. Every tool was counted daily, but pipes were classified as material, not tools, so surveillance over them was minimal. They weren't tracked. During James' previous escape attempt, his accomplice Jack Murlock had used a stolen pipe wrench. After that incident, security around the tools had begun tightened significantly. But pipes didn't fall under that category, and that loophole became their biggest advantage. Jack began removing one pipe at a time, almost every day. Sometimes he hid them under his clothes, other times he tossed them out of the workshop windows. Gradually, over several weeks, they collected enough pipes to build a ladder tall enough to reach the wall. During this time, James added another member to the escape team. Now the group had 3 members, James, Jack, and Earl. Some might wonder why James didn't involve his earlier accomplice, Jack Murlock. The answer was simple. After their failed attempt, prison authorities had transferred them to a different wings. They rarely had any contact anymore. Now the team began working on the next phase of the escape. They couldn't assemble the ladder openly in the yard. In daylight, guards would notice immediately, so they decided to hide the pipes near the exact section where they planned to scale the wall. It was the same location where the prison wall met the hillside slope, beneath the raised electrified wires. Near that spot there was a small drainage trench built to channel rainwater out. James had his team had the pipes inside the trench, covering them with leaves and debris. The trench's depth and position were ideal. Unless a guard stood directly above the looked down, the pipes remained invisible. It became the perfect hiding spot until the night of escape. Meanwhile, the team began closely monitoring guard routines. Inside the prison, guards were vastly outnumbered. On average, there were only 1 guard for every 50 inmates. Yes, they were armed, and yes, the prison had watchtowers and electric fencing. But the staffing shortage was the greatest weakness. James and his team carefully tracked every guard movement, their patrolling timings, and their habits. For their escape plan, the most critical position was watchtower number 4, because it stood closest to the wall section they planned to climb. After months of observation, they discovered something crucial. The guard stationed there, Floyd Hawks, had a habit. Every day he brought a newspaper and spent most of his shift reading it. He rarely even looked up towards the yard. James realized immediately his weakness would become a key part of their escape. Around this time, James once again sought help from his brother Jerry. As always, Jerry agreed. James asked him for 2 things. The first was money. Inside prison, money had many uses. Inmates could buy books, toiletries, small luxuries, even television from the canteen. Prisoners also paid each for the other services, like laundry work. James decided he would use the money to bribe certain inmates. Their job would be to create distractions and divert guard attention to escape on that night. But sending a large sum at once would raise suspicion, so Jerry smuggled the money in small installments. Over several months, James stored it patiently. He had stored the money carefully. The second thing James requested was an escape bag. He mentioned it in his coded letter. Jerry prepared the bag, filling it with everything James might need after escaping: hair dye, a raincoat for warmth, canned food, medicines, and loaded pistol. Jerry buried the bag underground in a cemetery near the prison, exactly where the team had pre-decided. Finally, the day arrived. Friday, June 10th, 1977. During afternoon recreation time, James and his team began executing their plan. The pipes they had hidden earlier in the trench were waiting. Step 1. Distract the guards. James had already bribed several inmates for this moment. At his signal, chaos erupted in the yard. Prisoners began shouting loudly, staging a fake fight among themselves. The entire yard descended into turmoil. Only 3 or 4 guards were present, and they became completely occupied trying to break up the fight. They couldn't focus on anything else. James immediately glanced toward watchtower number 4. Just as he expected, guard Floyd Hawks was fully absorbed in his newspaper and he hadn't noticed the chaos below. James knew this was their moment. He and his team rushed to the trench, pulled out the hidden pipes and began assembling the ladder. They had practiced this assembly multiple times. The entire structure was completed in less than a minute. At the top of the ladder, they had attached a hook-like extension so it could lock securely over the prison wall. Once assembled, James tested it first to ensure it was stable. The moment they had prepared for months had finally arrived. James lifted the metal ladder and began positioning it against the wall. But just as he raised it upward, something went wrong. The top end of the ladder rose too high and touched the electrified wires. The ladder had touched the electrified wire in the very next instant. A powerful current surged through the metal. A violent shock hurled James nearly 3 meters backward onto the ground. For a moment, his accomplices thought he might be dead, but after a few seconds, James slowly rose to his feet. His body was shaken, but his determination remained unbroken. Now Earl stepped forward. He carefully grabbed the ladder and with the measured precision, secured it properly against the wall. This time, the hook firmly attached into place. The ladder was ready. James was still trembling from the electrical shock, but he insisted on climbing first. It was his way of proving he was still capable of finishing what he started. As soon as he reached the top, Jack and Earl followed without hesitation. On the other side, the ground level was higher, just as James had predicted. They didn't have to risk a 5-meter drop. The hillside slope made the descent easier. Within moments, all 3 men were beyond the prison wall. But the breakout didn't remain unseen. Some inmates in the yard noticed the movement and seized the opportunity. One by one, 3 more prisoners began climbing the ladder to escape. The last among them was David Powell, a prison cook, still wearing his bright white chef's uniform. That glaring white outfit stood out instantly, catching the eye of a guard in the watchtower number 3. Unlike Floyd Hawks, this guard was fully alert. He raised his rifle immediately and took aim at an escaping inmate. The bullet struck Jerry Woods. He wasn't fatally wounded, but the impact knocked him down. As he fell, he dragged the ladder down with him. The remaining inmates attempting escape panicked and retreated. Meanwhile, the yard erupted into even greater chaos. Prisoners screamed loudly, "Over the wall! Over the wall!" The gunshots, the shouting, the commotion. Floyd Hawks finally snapped into attention. In panic, he grabbed his rifle, but in the rush, he slipped and fell to the ground. By then, it was already too late. James, Jack, Earl, and David, and other 2 inmates had crossed the wall and disappeared deep into the nearby forest. The prison siren blared loudly, throwing the entire area into chaos. The news was immediately relayed to the governor's office and to the law enforcement agencies. But there was a major problem. Brushy Mountain Prison was located in a very small town with a population of barely 500 people. Nearby police units and state security forces were stationed far away. As a result, reinforcement took a time to arrive, and that delay gave the escaped prisoners time to move deeper into the forest. Even if the initial response was slow, it didn't remain that way for long. Soon the entire region was flooded with security forces, local police, state troopers, border patrol units, and officers from multiple agencies converged on the area. Even the FBI joined the operation. The escape had now become national news. Media outlets from across the country gathered around Brushy Mountains. But for the FBI, the situation was even more serious, because among the escapees was James Earl Ray, one of America's most wanted criminals. Everyone was asking the same question: How did a prisoner as infamous as James manage to escape like this? The search operation was massive. Ground teams entered the forest, helicopters circled overhead, and bloodhounds were deployed to track the fugitive's scent. But the forest itself was a formidable obstacle, dense, rugged, and dangerous, not just for the search teams, but for the escapees as well. Authorities hoped the harsh terrain would slow them down. After crossing the prison wall, Jamie and the other ran straight into the forest. Soon they made a decision to split up. This would make it far harder for authorities to capture them. James had a clear destination in mind. He needed to reach Route 116. From there, he could make his way to the cemetery where Jerry had buried the escape bag. But as night fell, everything changed. Darkness thickened, and navigating through the forest became nearly impossible. In the chaos of escape, James had completely lost his sense of direction. Driven by adrenaline, he had run blindly, and now deep inside the forest, he realized he had no idea where he was. Dense trees and thick undergrowth made orientation impossible. After wandering for hours, James became certain he could reach neither the road nor the cemetery. This raises a question. Why wasn't Jerry waiting outside this time, like he had during the earlier attempt? The answer was simple. During the first escape, darkness had been James' shield. Guards had discovered the escape late, allowing Jerry to assist from outside. But this time, the breakout happened in the broad daylight, right in front of the guards. If Jerry had come near the prison, he would have drawn immediate suspicion. That's why he chose not to be physically present. Now alone, James kept moving deeper into the forest. His only goal was to put as much distance as possible between himself and the prison. For the next 48 hours, police, state troopers, border patrol, and FBI teams scoured the region. Out of the 6 escaped inmates, 4 were captured during this time, but James remained free. He was hungry, exhausted, and completely disoriented. Around 10:30 p.m., nearly 11 hours after the escape, a team of bloodhounds picked up his scent. The dogs barked intensely, leading their handlers deeper into the forest. Around 2 a.m., the dogs stopped near a pile of leaves, circling and barking loudly. Officers surrounded the spot, weapons drawn. One guard nudged the leaf pile with his rifle, and suddenly, James emerged, hands raised in surrender. He had tried hiding beneath the leaves, but the bloodhounds had exposed him. Without resistance, he handed himself over to the authorities. Shortly afterward, the 6th escapee was also captured, and with that, the entire escape attempt was officially over. Later, James learned he had run in the wrong direction. Had he gone the opposite way, he would have reached the road leading to the cemetery. The same cemetery where Jerry had buried the escape bag. With that bag, he could have stolen a car or caught a ride out of the region. But fate did not favor him. He was captured just 10 kilometers from the prison. The failed escape became the national news. Newspapers, radio, television discussed it for weeks. As punishment, his sentence was increased from 99 years to 100 years, a symbolic addition, since practically it made little difference. Even after this, James continued attempting escape in later years, but by then, prison authorities kept him under constant, strict surveillance. Any new plan had become nearly impossible. Throughout his life, James insisted he was not the real killer of Martin Luther King Jr. He claimed he had been framed, used as a scapegoat. Interestingly, some members of King's own family also believed James was not guilty. Their suspicions pointed towards government agencies, including the CIA, sparking discussions of a larger conspiracy. To this day, the debate continues. Was James truly the assassin, or merely a pawn in the greater plot? Perhaps the most logical conclusion in this is that he may have played a role, but was pushed forward to shield the real masterminds. Whatever the truth, James Earl Ray maintained his innocence until the final breath. In 1998, he died inside prison walls, and with him, perhaps, died the full truth behind the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr.